think of ancient Greece, your mind probably conjures images of, serene philosophers, epic heroes, and those iconic gleaming marble temples.
Absolutely, the classic postcard view, right?
Exactly. You might even picture perfectly sculpted figures embodying ideals of noble beauty. But what if we told you that some of their most revered myths feature family members literally on the dinner menu? Or that the ideal male physique in their art wasn't quite what you might expect today? It really challenges our modern ideas of beauty and masculinity in truly surprising ways.
We want to uncover the surprising, sometimes dark, and often very practical nuggets of knowledge about what life was truly like.
And what values really underpin their society beyond the surface level stuff.
Precisely, to provide you, the listener, with a kind of shortcut to being well-informed, offering those genuine aha.
We're diving into the deeply disturbing world of cannibalism and intense family strife, as depicted in their foundational myths.
And this wasn't just folklore, right? These stories were their explanations for reality, in a way.
That's the key point. It's crucial to understand that for the ancient Greeks, mythology was far more than just a collection of entertaining stories or quaint fables. No, it served as a fundamental framework for comprehending the world around them, a kind of cosmic operating manual, if you will.
I like that. A cosmic operating manual.
These narratives provided explanations for natural phenomena, dictated the rewards and punishments handed down by the gods, and essentially outlined the moral and cosmic order of the universe.
And as we dig into these tales, it becomes starkly clear that they were often grim, really grim, frequently involving what can only be described as extreme violence. You've got blood vengeance, murder, cannibalism, and incest.
Yeah, all the heavy hitters.
Pretty much. And the theme of family members on the menu was, disturbingly, a notable and recurring motif. It wasn't just a random act of savagery for shock value, either.
No. What was the point then?
Well, these acts were often deeply intertwined with fundamental questions of power, fate, and cosmic justice. They were a reflection of the raw, untamed forces that the Greeks believed shaped their destiny. It's about cycles of power, fear of succession, the very nature of divine rule.
And nothing really encapsulates that raw, often horrifying cycle of power quite like the tale of Cronus.
Cronus, or Kronos, depending on your spelling, king of the Titans.
Right. He was the youngest of the Titans, the generation of deities that preceded the Olympians we usually think of, like Zeus. And he rose to power through an act of immense violence and usurpation.
Against his own father, no less.
Exactly. Overthrowing his own father, Uranus, the primordial deity of heaven, and Gaia, the earth. This wasn't just a simple rebellion. It was a brutal reordering of the divine hierarchy.
A very violent start to his reign.
But, as with so many Greek myths, this act of overthrow came with a chilling prophecy. Cronus himself was foretold to be overthrown by one of his own children. Can you imagine the fear that must have gripped him? Knowing that the very fate he inflicted upon his father awaited him from his own progeny. It was an inescapable cycle, a divine Oedipus complex on a cosmic scale almost.
That fear, that deep-seated anxiety about succession and the cyclical nature of power, it drove Cronus to an unthinkable, truly primal act.
The cannibalism part.
Yes. To prevent the prophecy from coming true, he made a chilling decision. He would directly devour all the children born from his marriage with his sister, Rhea.
His sister Rhea, right. Lots of divine incest, too.
Oh, yes, that's standard in many pantheons. So as each of his divine offspring was born Hestia, Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hades, he swallowed them whole, one by one.
Wow.
It's an image that captures the absolute terror of losing power and the monstrous lengths to which divine beings, like mortals maybe, would go to circumvent their perceived destiny.
So it wasn't just physical consumption.
Probably not just that. It was a desperate attempt to absorb and neutralize the threat, to symbolically uncreate his own lineage and thus prevent his downfall. It reflects a profound understanding among the Greeks of power dynamics within families, mirroring the power struggles of the cosmos itself.
But Rhea, their mother, She must have been devastated.
Naturally. So when Zeus, her youngest, was born, she devised a clever deception, a desperate plan.
The stone in swaddling clothes.
That's the one. Instead of giving Cronus the infant Zeus, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to him. Cronus, consumed by his fear-driven frenzy and perhaps, not looking too closely.
Or maybe just assuming it was another kid to gulp down.
Possibly. He swallowed the stone, believing he had consumed his last potential challenger. This seemingly simple act of trickery was a pivotal moment, a tiny seed of defiance against overwhelming power.
And it worked.
It worked. This deception allowed Zeus to grow up hidden in secret, protected, probably on Crete in most versions, and eventually he returned to challenge his tyrannical father, fulfilling the very prophecy Cronus had tried so desperately and gruesomely to avoid.
So Zeus comes back. How does he get his siblings out?
Well, the myths vary a bit, but a common version involves help, often from Metis, who was wisdom personified. She gives Cronus an emetic something to make him vomit. But it forces him to regurgitate all his swallowed children, now fully grown, mind you.
Fully grown from inside him.
Divine biology, I suppose. Don't question it too much. And he vomits up the stone, too. That stone, the Omphalos stone, became a sacred object at Delphi, symbolizing the center of the world, or maybe the beginning of this new order.
Okay, so they're out. Then what?
Then war. Zeus united with his resurrected siblings, Hestia, Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hades, to launch a fierce 10-year cosmic war against Cronus and the other Titans. This huge conflict is known as the Titanomachy.
The ultimate struggle for cosmic supremacy.
Exactly. It wasn't just a battle, it was the forging of a new world order. Ultimately, it resulted in Zeus's triumph and the establishment of the Olympian gods as the new ruling pantheon.
And Cronus.
He and the other defeated Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus. That's the deepest, darkest abyss of the underworld. Power as inherently cyclical, often violent, and subject to an almost inevitable generational shift. The son replaces the father, frequently through brutal means, and the fear of that replacement, it suggests that even among the gods, power is never truly stable. It's always contested, always vulnerable.
It's a truly grim cycle, isn't it? Where the most primal fears and desires for power play out on a cosmic stage. And if you think that was just a divine quirk, think again.
Oh no, it gets worse, or at least just as bad when mortals get involved.
Right, because this terrifying theme of human flesh on the menu even extended to the interactions between gods and mortals, with devastating consequences that highlighted the strict boundaries between the human and divine realms. The story of Tantalus is a perfect, gruesome example.
Tantalus, son of Zeus, wasn't he?
Yep, a mortal, but son of Zeus himself. And he was initially favored by the gods beyond measure, like really favored. He was even regularly invited to dine with them on Mount Olympus.
Which was an incredible, almost unheard of privilege for a mortal. You don't just pop up to Olympus for dinner.
Exactly. And this immense divine favor, ironically, it fueled his immense hubris, his arrogance.
He got too big for his boots, essentially.
Way too big. Despite this extraordinary access to the divine realm, he decided to test if the gods really knew everything.
A desire to prove himself equal to, or maybe even cleverer than, the gods.
Seems like it. He invited the gods to dinner at his palace, and he committed an unspeakable act.
Don't tell me.
Oh yes. He murdered his own son, Pelops, dismembered him, and then served him to the gods, disguised as a lavish meal.
No, that's even darker than Cronus, in a way. Cronus was trying to survive, Tantalus was just testing.
Testing and transgressing. It was an ultimate transgression against both divine wisdom and the most fundamental natural law, the bond between parent and child. He was challenging the very fabric of the cosmos, believing he could outwit divine knowledge.
So did they fall for it? Did they eat?
Well, there's a tragic twist. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, she was deeply grieving the recent loss of her daughter, Persephone, who had been abducted by Hades to the underworld. So, driven by her grief, Demeter was distracted, and unknowingly, she ate a piece of Pelops' shoulder. Just a piece.
Oh, poor Demeter. And poor Pelops. But the other gods?
They knew immediately. They realized the horrifying deception. They were disgusted, enraged by Tantalus' audacity and sacrilege. You just don't do that.
I should hope not. So what happened to Pelops?
The gods, being gods, reassembled him. They brought him back to life through their divine power, but he was forever marked by the ordeal. That missing shoulder was replaced with a piece of gleaming ivory.
a permanent reminder.
A powerful image of divine correction, an act of restorative justice that couldn't fully erase the original horror.
And Tantalus, his punishment must have been severe.
Oh, legendary. It was justly severe and eternal, becoming the very source of our English word tantalize.
Right, to be tempted by something forever out of reach.
Exactly. He was condemned to Tartarus, that same deep pit where Cronus ended up. There he suffered perpetual hunger and thirst. He stood in a pool of water up to his chin, but whenever he bent to drink, the water would recede.
Agonizing.
And luscious fruit hung on branches just above his head, but whenever he reached for it, the wind would blow the branches just out of his grasp, forever.
So not just physical torment, but psychological torture too. Eternally reminded of his desires and his absolute inability to satisfy them.
This story really emphasizes those clear, inviolable boundaries between mortals and gods. You don't test them, you don't challenge their knowledge, and you certainly don't violate sacred norms like the parent-child bond. The consequences are extreme and unending.
It highlights the absolute importance of familial bonds, even when violated, and the ultimate futility of human arrogance when pitted against divine power. The message is pretty clear. The gods do know everything, and you challenge them at your absolute peril. Their justice is swift and eternal.
And if you thought the family horrors stopped there, with gods eating kids and dads serving sons, think again.
Oh dear. There's more.
There's more. The myth of Atreus and Thyestes takes sibling rivalry and the cycle of vengeance to a whole new level of depravity.
So the trauma continues in the next generation.
It absolutely does. They became embroiled in a violent multi-generational feud over power and a sacred object, the golden ram's fleece.
Ah, the golden fleece. That sounds familiar, but maybe a different one than Jason's.
Different fleece, same idea of it conferring legitimacy or power. This wasn't just a squabble over inheritance, it was a deep, bitter rivalry for the throne of Mycenae, a struggle that would define their entire lineage and lead to, well, more horror.
So how did this feud escalate? It usually involves betrayal, doesn't it?
Layers of almost unimaginable betrayal and deception. Thyestes, consumed by ambition, not only had an affair with Atreus' wife, Arab, but, compounding the insult, he also, with her help, stole the golden fleece from Atreus.
Strike two. That's major.
It was huge, because the Oracle of Delphi had apparently declared that whoever possessed the golden fleece should be king of Mycenae. So, with the fleece in hand, Thyestes cunningly became king.
So he usurped his brother through adultery and theft. That's bold.
It wasn't just a betrayal of marriage, it was a profound betrayal of sibling trust and a direct, calculated challenge to rightful succession. That demanded vengeance. It set the stage for a truly horrific reciprocal action.
I'm almost afraid to ask what Atreus did.
Atreus, understandably, was consumed by a desire for revenge so profound it drove him to an act of truly cunning and cruel manipulation. First, he somehow managed to reclaim the throne. The myths get a bit fantastical here. See, according to some versions, he got the god Hermes involved. Hermes made it appear as though the sun rose in the west and set in the east for a day, an impossible, unnatural phenomenon. This somehow convinced the people of Mycenae that Atreus was the new, divinely ordained king, proving his power and the gods' favor over Thyestes. So with power back firmly in his hands, Atreus then invited Thyestes back to Mycenae for a reconciliation meal.
Oh no, not another meal. I see where this is going.
The meal ostensibly meant to signify the mending of their fractured relationship, but it was all a terrifying, meticulously planned trap. The invitation itself was an act of insidious deception, turning a gesture of peace into one of ultimate horror.
So the climax,
Yeah.
the feast.
The shocking climax, the cannibalistic feast, Atreus served Thyestes a magnificent stew. Thyestes ate heartily, thinking all was forgiven.
Oh, the poor fool.
After Thyestes had finished eating, Atreus brought out another platter, covered. He unveiled it, revealing the dismembered heads and feet of Thyestes' own sons.
Oh, no.
Yes, revealing with chilling malice that Thyestes had just consumed his own children in the stew.
I have no words. That's beyond monstrous.
Imagine that moment of discovery, the sheer unimaginable horror, the total violation of every human and familial bond. It is a profound act of revenge, designed not just to kill, but to utterly desecrate and annihilate his brother's lineage and sanity.
And Thyestes, what happened to him?
Upon realizing the unspeakable act, he was driven mad with grief and rage. He laid a devastating curse upon Atreus and his entire lineage. This curse, known as the Curse of the House of Atreus, is infamous.
And it played out later, right, with Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, arrest haunting figures in later myths and many of the great Greek tragedies.
It truly highlights the horrifying escalation of revenge within a family, doesn't it? And the absolute depths of human cruelty.
These stories, whether they involve gods or mortals, they reflect a very dark, almost cynical view of human nature, and the enduring, often inescapable nature of curses and divine retribution in Greek thought.
It feels like they're saying actions have consequences, huge generational consequences, and that the bonds of family, which should be sacred, can be twisted into instruments of unspeakable torment.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder that their narratives weren't just bedtime stories. They often featured the most extreme and disturbing behaviors as a way to understand the very worst of themselves and their world, the darkness within.
So, okay, if these myths represent the dramatic, often terrifying side of ancient Greek beliefs, grappling with these really dark aspects of human nature, how did these intense, almost primal narratives translate into the art they produced? Specifically, like statues.
That's an excellent question. You'd think maybe the art would reflect that wildness, that raw passion.
Yeah.
What you find in Greek statues can be quite surprising, especially when compared to modern ideals of, say, the male form. Well, when you visit museums and look at those iconic Greek statues, you'll commonly observe that men are depicted with, broad shoulders, imposing muscles, and a fit posture. They certainly embody strength, athleticism, and a kind of noble presence.
Right, the classic heroic physique.
Exactly. However, one specific detail often strikes modern viewers as unusual and honestly can even prompt a chuckle or some confusion.
Ah, yes. We're talking about the strikingly small genitalia.
We are indeed. And the crucial thing to understand is that this isn't an accident. It wasn't a lack of anatomical understanding or simply a matter of modesty or censorship.
Though they could have sculpted them larger if they wanted to.
Oh, absolutely. They were masters of anatomy. No, this was a deliberate choice, deeply symbolic and rooted in their core philosophical ideals.
Okay, so it completely challenges our contemporary aesthetic expectations, doesn't it? Today, we might instinctively think that a larger depiction would symbolize virility, power, or masculinity in a robust sense.
Right. More is more in that view. But for the ancient Greeks, it was pretty much the opposite. The artistic purpose was far more profound than simply covering up or ignoring anatomy.
What was the purpose then?
Well, on one level, the primary goal was aesthetic harmony, to maintain the lines of the male body in a balanced, idealized way. They wanted to ensure the viewer's attention wasn't distracted by a large appendage from the overall form and proportion.
Okay, so a design choice partly.
Partly. But this aesthetic choice speaks to a much deeper underlying philosophy that guided their art. Their art wasn't just visual representation, it was an embodiment of their values.
And what was that core value?
The core of this artistic choice lies in a profoundly important Greek concept called enkrateia.
Enkrateia. Okay, what does that mean?
It doesn't have a single, simple English equivalent, unfortunately, but it translates broadly to things like self-mastery, self-control, or temperance, inner strength, basically.
Ah, okay. Self-control. So how does that relate to the statues?
Well, in Greek sculpture, a small penis shows that a man has control over his sexual urges.
So small equals controlled.
Exactly. It symbolizes total mastery and the ideal masculine man, one whose intellect and reason govern his passions rather than the other way around. This wasn't about physical size as we might interpret it today. It was a profound visual metaphor for inner discipline. The desired qualities embodied by this depiction were things like moderation, modesty, wisdom, and logic qualities that were prized above all else for a truly virtuous citizen and leader in their society.
Wow. That completely flips the modern script. So do they have examples of the opposite in their art to show it not to be?
Oh, absolutely. To really drive that point home, the ancient Greeks created powerful counterexamples. They had
Yeah.
very clear negative associations with large genitalia in their representations of men.
Really?
As we explore their art, it becomes evident that large genitalia are precisely associated with ugliness.
Not just uncontrolled, but actually ugly.
Yes, it signified a lack of control, being ruled by base instincts, which they saw as fundamentally unrefined and, yes, unattractive in an ideal human. It's a complete inversion of many modern perceptions of masculinity, isn't it?
Totally. So who were these counterexamples?
The perfect illustration of this stark contrast comes from figures in Greek mythology like the satyrs.
Ah, the half-man, half-goat guys, usually chasing nymphs.
Those are the ones. Satyrs are often depicted with large, stiff penises, sometimes exaggeratedly so. They are the very embodiment of unrefined and wild behavior, lacking any self-control, consumed by their base desires for wine and sex, perpetually pursuing pleasure. So when you see a Greek statue of a god or a hero with small genitalia, it's not a commentary on anatomy, it's a powerful philosophical statement.
A statement about the human condition and the pinnacle of male virtue as they saw it.
Precisely. It tells us that Greek art was not just about physical beauty or idealized forms, but was deeply imbued with profound philosophical and moral ideals. It provides a fascinating, almost startling window into their core values. It was about the triumph of disciplined reason over untamed instinct, a lesson they conveyed not just in their philosophy, but in the very marble they carved.
This emphasis on self-control and moderation in their art, this pursuit of encritia, it's really fascinating. It makes you wonder, though, how did these ideals, this intellectual and aesthetic pursuit of inner discipline, actually translate into the everyday lives of ancient Greeks?
That's the million drachma question, isn't it? What was the practical reality beyond the myths and the sculpted ideals that adorned their temples?
Right.
Well, it's important to ground ourselves in the everyday, to understand the concrete realities of ancient Greek life. And the first thing to grasp is that the vast majority of ancient Greeks, unlike the grand temples and public buildings we often admire, lived in quite simple dwellings.
Not marble palaces, then.
Definitely not for most people. Their houses were typically made of readily available local materials like clay, stone, or wood, often sun-dried mud brick on a stone foundation, and they were closely packed together on narrow streets, forming dense urban neighborhoods or village centers. Think close quarters.
What were the houses like inside?
Most were fairly modest, often single-story structures built around a central courtyard. This courtyard was absolutely the heart of household activity.
So cooking and stuff happened outside?
Yes, the courtyard served as the primary space for cooking, washing, maybe some weaving, and communal eating. It suggests a very communal, somewhat open living style within the family unit. Privacy wasn't the same concept as today.
And I guess, as you'd expect in a deeply patriarchal society, there was probably some separation inside the house, too.
Oh, absolutely. There was often a clear gender segregation, especially noticeable in wealthier homes, which directly mirrored the societal roles assigned to men and women.
Like different rooms for men and women.
Exactly. You had the andron. This was the dedicated room, usually near the entrance for male family members and their guests. It was often the best decorated room.
And that's where the famous symposia happened. The drinking parties.
Precisely. The symposia were held in the andron. This was a vital part of male social life, a place for intellectual discourse, political networking, poetry, music, where men would recline on couches, drink diluted wine, and engage in philosophical debates or storytelling. Strictly male territory.
So where were the women?
In stark contrast to the lively, public-facing andron was the gynaikein.
Oh.
This was the exclusive domain of women. It was often located on an upper floor if the house had one, or in the most secluded part of the house, furthest from the entrance and the andron, away from the gaze of male visitors.
What happened there?
Here, women worked spinning, weaving, slept, and cared for the young children. This architectural separation wasn't just practical, it profoundly reinforced the deeply patriarchal nature of Greek society.
Where the man was the head of the household, the kurios.
Exactly. He held pretty much all the authority. Women, especially citizen women in places like Athens, were largely expected to stay indoors. Their primary focus was the household, oikos, raising children and supervising enslaved women if the family could afford them. Their public life was severely limited, unlike the men who freely navigated the agora. So the home was both their sanctuary and, in many ways, their confines.
You mentioned supervising enslaved women. Slavery was common.
Extremely common. They powered much of its economy and daily life. We can't really understand ancient Greece without acknowledging that.
What kind of work did they do?
A huge range of tasks. Household work, like fetching water, which was heavy labor, grinding grain, cooking, cleaning, childcare, to working the land in the fields alongside poorer citizens, or helping in shops and workshops in the cities as artisans.
And they had no rights.
Pretty much none. It's clear that enslaved individuals had virtually no legal rights. They could be bought or sold, rented out, beaten, essentially treated as property, living tools, as Aristotle somewhat chillingly put it. Their lives were entirely at the discretion of their owners.
That's grim. Were there any exceptions?
Well, it's a complex picture, and we shouldn't oversimplify. There were exceptions or nuances. Some enslaved people, often those captured in war or highly skilled, were well-educated and worked as teachers or doctors or as managers of businesses or estates. This suggests a spectrum of experiences, even within a brutal system of bondage, but they were still property.
So what does this tell us about their society overall? They had these high ideals like antiquity and democracy.
Right, but those ideals coexisted with, and in many ways relied upon, a rigid social hierarchy and widespread inequality. The very architecture of their homes reflected and reinforced these power dynamics, from the male-dominated common spaces to the women's secluded quarters and the omnipresent yet often unacknowledged labor of enslaved individuals.
So it paints a picture of a society that, despite its incredible intellectual and artistic achievements, was far removed from our modern egalitarian ideals.
Absolutely. The daily lives of most Greeks were fundamentally shaped by these divisions based on citizenship, gender, and freedom, which were largely seen as a natural, unchangeable order.
Okay, so what sustained these people day to day beyond their social structures? Let's turn to work, economy, and just basic sustenance. What did they do all day?
Well, the backbone of the ancient Greek economy was overwhelmingly agricultural. Despite the famous cities, the vast majority of Greeks were farmers. Most worked small plots of land, often quite rugged and challenging terrain, especially in mainland Greece. It wasn't easy farming. This was a stark contrast to, say, large-scale plantation agriculture elsewhere.
What are the main things they grew?
The Mediterranean triad, as it's often called. Grain, mostly barley and some wheat, used for bread and porridge, the absolute basic staple. Olives, absolutely essential for olive oil, which they used for cooking. And grapes, primarily for wine, which was a ubiquitous part of their diet and culture.
Grain, olives, and grapes, the big three.
Couldn't survive without them. Alongside these vital crops, they kept livestock, but not huge herds usually, mainly goats, sheep, and chickens. Goats and sheep provided crucial resources like milk, which was usually turned into cheese, a key source of protein, wool for making clothing and blankets, and occasionally some meat, though as we'll see, meat wasn't an everyday thing at all. Chickens provided eggs, and sometimes meat too.
What about people in the cities? What do they do?
For those living in urban centers, especially the bustling port cities like Athens or Corinth or Miletus, occupations varied significantly. You'd find skilled craftsmen, potters, metalworkers, shoemakers, weavers, sculptors, fishermen, especially important for coastal communities, providing fresh protein, construction workers, building those magnificent temples, walls, and public structures we still admire, or traders and sailors facilitating the exchange of goods like pottery, wine, oil, and grain across the Mediterranean.
So a more diverse economy in the cities, but still pretty labor-intensive.
Very much so. Driven by trade and specialized skills rather than large-scale manufacturing in a modern sense.
Okay, let's talk diet. What did they actually eat day to day? You said it was simple.
For breakfast, a typical Greek might have had just a piece of bread, maybe barley bread dipped in wine or with olives, a very light start.
Bread and wine for breakfast, okay.
Diluted wine, remember. Lunch would often be eaten on the go or be quite simple too. Maybe some beans, vegetables, more bread, or goat cheese. Something easy to eat in the fields or workshops.
And dinner, was that the main meal?
Yes, dinner was generally the main meal and a more communal affair, eaten towards evening. It typically included things like fish, if available and affordable, especially near the coast. Legumes like lentils or chickpeas were very important sources of protein. Various vegetables, maybe some fruit in season like figs or grapes, and of course, wine.
You mentioned meat was rare.
Extremely rare for most people. It was rarely eaten, usually only during religious festivals or sacrifices. Animals were valuable for other things like wool or milk or plowing, so killing them for meat was a big deal. When meat was eaten, it was often part of a religious ritual where the gods got the fattened bones and the worshippers shared the cooked meat. It made meat a luxury and a ceremonial item, not a regular dietary staple.
That tells us a lot about their resources and maybe their priorities.
It does. It reflects the constraints of their environment and economy, and it highlights a largely plant-based diet for the majority.
You mentioned the wine was always diluted.
Almost always, yes. Wine was almost always diluted with water, typically in a special mixing bowl called a crater. The ratio varied, maybe 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine.
Why did they do that? Just to make it last longer?
That might have been part of it, but it was also a strong cultural norm. Drinking undiluted wine, akritos, was considered barbaric, uncivilized. It was associated with excessive behavior, loss of control, the behavior of, well, barbarians or those wild, unrestrained satyrs we talked about earlier.
Ah, so it ties back to Enkratia again. Self-control even in drinking.
Quite possibly. It reflects a cultural emphasis on moderation, even in pleasure. So this whole picture highlights the practical, agrarian nature of their society and the simple, largely plant-based, moderate diet that sustained them. It contrasts sharply with modern abundance and dietary habits. Their meals were about necessity, practicality, and sometimes communal ritual, not really about luxury or excessive indulgence for most people.
So we've covered their homes, their work, what they ate. What about how they spent their free time, assuming they had any? How did they educate their children? And how deeply ingrained were those social hierarchies we touched on?
Right. Leisure, education, and social stratification were all deeply intertwined in ancient Greece and varied massively depending on who you were, especially for the free male citizens.
Okay, so what do they do?
For them, public life and much of their leisure revolved around the agora, the central marketplace of the city. It wasn't just a place for trade, buying and selling goods. It was a vibrant hub for politics, justice, and philosophy. Men would gather there to hear news, discuss public policy, serve on juries, listen to speeches, and engage in philosophical discourse. Think Socrates.
So it's the social and civic center.
Absolutely. The agora also featured various forms of entertainment and communal activities. And nearby, you'd often have public buildings, temples, and maybe access to things like public baths, theater performances, especially during festivals, and areas for informal sports competitions. It was the nerve center of male civic and social life.
What about the gymnasia? Weren't they important too?
Hugely important. The gymnasia were another key center of male activity. They weren't solely for physical training, though that was certainly a core function, exercising naked, hence the name gymnos, naked. This prepared young men for military service and for athletic competitions like the Olympic Games.
But not just sports.
No, crucially, these were also places for intellectual development, particularly for older boys and young men. They could receive instruction in things like literature and science, listen to lectures, and engage in discussions. This dual emphasis on musico, cultural intellectual pursuits, and gymnastico, physical training, was central to the ideal upbringing of free Greek men, aiming to cultivate a well-rounded citizen's sound mind and a sound body.
But education wasn't equal for everyone, was it?
Not even close. Education was highly differentiated based on gender and wealth, reflecting that rigid social structure we keep coming back to. Boys from citizen families generally received a basic education in reading, writing, arithmetic, music, often learning the lyre, and of course sports. For the elite, wealthy boys also received philosophy lessons, rhetoric, more advanced literature, often from renowned thinkers in private settings or academies, like Plato's Academy. This advanced education set them apart, preparing them for leadership roles and sophisticated intellectual engagement. It was a marker of status.
And for girls, what was their education like?
Starkly different, especially in Athens. Girls typically stayed at home and learned from their mother or other female relatives. Their education was practical, centered entirely on domestic skills needed to run a household: how to spin wool, cook, weave textiles, manage supplies, and care for the family. Formal schooling was almost entirely absent for them.
So their education just prepared them for life in the home.
It reinforced their restricted roles in a male-dominated society. Sparta, as we'll see, was a bit different, but for most Greek girls, this was the norm.
What about little kids? Did they just work, or did they play?
Oh, they definitely played. While childhood wasn't sentimentalized like today, children, regardless of background, found time for play. Archaeology and art show us this. They played with common, simple items like marbles, knuckle bones, often made from sheep joints, clay dolls, hoops and balls.
Sounds familiar.
Right, universal stuff. Games like jump rope and animal games, where children mimicked animal movements or played tag, were also popular. These details remind us that despite the strict societal structures, childhood still involved universal elements of imagination, physical activity, and simple joys.
But underlying all this, the reality was profound societal inequality. You keep mentioning the free male citizens.
Yes, because that distinction is crucial. Only free male citizens, adult men born to citizen parents in most cities, held the reins of power. They were the exclusive group allowed to vote, participate in popular assemblies, or hold political office. Even in democracies like Athens, everyone else was excluded.
And women.
Women, even citizen women, had essentially no political rights. No voting rights, couldn't hold office, couldn't represent themselves in court. And as we said, they were often restricted to the home, especially in Athens, where their public visibility was minimal, almost to the point of being invisible outside the domestic sphere or specific religious festivals.
Okay, and then there were the enslaved people.
Yes, a huge group. Enslaved people formed a large part of the population, maybe a third or even more in places like Athens, with absolutely no rights. They worked in homes, fields, workshops, or in truly brutal conditions like the state-owned silver mines at Laurium near Athens, where life expectancy was incredibly short.
And were there other groups? Foreigners?
Yes, another distinct group, particularly in cosmopolitan cities like Athens, was the metoikoi, or medics. These were foreign residents, people from other Greek cities or even non-Greeks who lived and worked in Athens long-term.
Did they have rights?
Some, but limited. Metoikoi could work and pay taxes, and they had to serve in the military, but they could not own land or vote or hold office. They were in a permanent state of partial integration without full citizenship, a kind of permanent resident alien status, always dependent on a citizen sponsor.
So it sounds like citizenship was everything.
Absolutely everything. It determined your rights, your status, your potential in life.
But you mentioned Sparta was different.
Yes, Sparta offered a significant exception, highlighting the diversity within ancient Greek city-states. Spartan women had more freedom in some respects. They were allowed to play sports, often training alongside boys when young, and they received an education, at least in basics like reading and writing and music and dance.
Why was Sparta different?
It was largely due to Sparta's unique military focus. The state needed healthy, educated mothers to produce and raise strong future soldiers. Spartan women could also own and manage property, partly because the men were so often away training or at war, but they still couldn't vote or hold political office. More freedom, but not equality.
And this brings us maybe to that key distinction between the two most famous city-states, Athens and Sparta. Their priorities seem so different.
Very different, almost polar opposites in many ways. While Athens, especially in the classical period, focused heavily on education and debate,
Sparta was all about the army.
pretty much, Sparta's entire societal structure was geared towards the military. Boys in Sparta were taken from their homes as young as age 7. They entered a rigorous, brutal, state-controlled training system known as the agoge, designed to produce elite, disciplined warriors above all else. Individualism, luxury, even strong family ties were suppressed in favor of loyalty to the state and military unit.
So philosophy versus fighting, basically. Oversimplified, maybe?
A bit oversimplified, but it captures the core difference in emphasis. This contrast underscores the varied priorities and social engineering present even within what we broadly categorize as ancient Greek society. There was no single monolithic Greek experience. Being Athenian was very different from being Spartan or Corinthian or Theban.
So these insights into everyday life, they really underscore the strict social hierarchy, don't they? Those specific roles dictated by gender, status, freedom, citizenship. It illustrates a society so far from our modern egalitarian ideals.
Absolutely. It shows a highly structured world where your place was largely determined by birth and gender, and where civic participation and privilege were reserved for a very narrow segment of the population. It was a world that, despite its incredible intellectual leaps and artistic beauty, was built upon profound inequalities, which were largely accepted by them as the natural order of things.
And woven through every single aspect of these lives, from the simple meals they ate to the grand social structures they built, the art, the philosophy, was religion, right?
Oh, fundamentally. You cannot understand ancient Greece without understanding the role of religion. They were polytheistic, meaning they believed in many gods, not just one. Figures like Zeus, the king of the gods, ruler of the sky, Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, crafts, and the powerful patron of Athens, Apollo, god of the sun, music, prophecy, healing, and plague, Hera, Zeus's wife and sister, goddess of marriage and childbirth, Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, among many, many others. Gods, demigods, nymphs, heroes, a whole complex divine world.
And each city had its own special god.
Often, yes. Each polis or city-state typically had a patron god or goddess who was considered its special protector. Athena for Athens, Hera for Argos, Apollo for Delphi and Corinth, Poseidon also for Corinth. This made the connection between the divine and the city incredibly strong and personal. Civic identity and religious identity were intertwined.
How did this religion show up in daily life? Was it just temple stuff?
No, it was truly everywhere present. It wasn't just a once-a-week activity confined to a temple.
Give us some examples.
Well, people would constantly make offerings of food, wine, or animals to the gods. These could be small daily offerings at a home altar or large public sacrifices during festivals. It was about maintaining a good relationship with the divine, showing reverence, euspeia, gratitude, or asking for specific favors, a safe voyage, healing, victory.
And the big festivals.
They were crucial. People actively participated in grand festivals and processions, which were major public holidays. Think of the Panathenea in Athens, a magnificent multi-day celebration for Athena involving a huge procession carrying a new robe, Peplis, to her statue on the Acropolis, plus athletic games, musical contests, and sacrifices.
Or the Olympics.
Exactly. The famous Olympic Games, held every 4 years at Olympia, were fundamentally a religious festival in honor of Zeus. The athletic competitions were part of a larger ritual context that included sacrifices and oaths. Winning brought glory not just to the athlete, but to their city and favored the god.
Dramatic, often terrifying myths reflecting deep-seated fears about power, fate, and family, with shockingly brutal depictions of, well, cannibalism that laid bare their understanding of cosmic order and the extremes of human nature.
A raw, unflinching look at the darker side.
Then we explored their artistic ideals, how that concept of enkratia, self-mastery, was celebrated in unexpected ways, like the sculpting of male bodies, which is so contrary to many modern aesthetic preferences. It shows how philosophy was literally carved into their physical ideals.
Turning an abstract value into a visual standard.
Yeah, and we peeled back the curtain on the simple, often stark realities of their everyday lives. From their agrarian economy and patriarchal homes, the strict gender roles, the reliance on enslaved labor, to their simple diet, their leisure, their very specific social hierarchies.
What other profound or even unsettling aspects of ancient civilizations or any historical period might we still be overlooking? And maybe more importantly, how can approaching history with a fresh, curious eye like a detective, really, how can that unlock these hidden narratives?
Narratives that might connect directly to our own modern world.
Precisely. And challenge our preconceived notions of the past. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that history isn't static. It's not just a collection of facts in a book. It's a living, breathing subject, constantly being re-examined, waiting for new interpretations and surprising connections to be made. There's always more to uncover.